before each one of these webinars. Of course, the grounding principle of Crossroads is compassion. So we really, really want to ground all of our interactions with each other, with our faculty members, and with the Crossroads team in compassion. So I hope you all stay open-minded and are receptive to new ideas, and also kind and engaged with your peers from all over the world. We're so excited to introduce you all to Dr. Hise Gibson. Dr. Gibson received a Doctor of Business Administration degree in Technology and Operations Management from Harvard Business School. His expertise is the intersection of operational effectiveness and human capital development. He has worked with mid-size and large transportation and distribution organizations, retailers, finance, energy, and tech startups on operational issues and pathways to better leverage their human capital in more effective ways, maximizing the intersection of technology, people, and processes. I know just based on his brief little bio, we've talked a lot about technology, people, and processes in the last couple of sessions. So I hope you're all really, really excited for today's. We'll keep the chat open for questions. So as Dr. Gibson is speaking, please feel free to message your questions in there, and we'll also take questions throughout the session. Really, really excited to go ahead and get started. So Dr. Gibson, over to you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage this group. And I know some of you are in the US, but many are outside of the US. And so really thank you for logging in and engaging. So what we're going to do today is really reinforce some ideas that I'm sure you all have had, and also think about how do we consider leading in crisis and leading in the new normal, because the past year has highlighted an adjustment in human behavior that causes a lot of leaders some angst, some anxiety, concerns, because the way in which we've had to engage with each other has drastically changed over the past year versus previous issues. So there's been many times over the past couple of 100 years where we've had crises, we've had issues, and we've always been able to respond. This is just a little bit different. And so I would just like to recap this new normal, and then also suggest a couple of frameworks that may help you as you engage in leading and being part of effective teams. So let's get going. And at the end of each segment, I'll do a pause. Please pose any questions that you have in the chat. And then at each segment, we'll stop. I'll answer some questions and then we'll move on. Okay, and then I'll leave time at the very end for any outstanding external questions that you may have. So what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes is, let's just re-describe the new normal, which is not new anymore. It is the way in which we're operating today. I'm going to present this idea of systems thinking, and there's many, many different ideas around what systems thinking is, but it is a whole domain. And having taught what I'm going to share with you, I've taught this kind of systems thinking framework multiple times in order to help leaders at all levels understand best how to approach ambiguity and operate in the gray space. And then a takeaway for you: how do you lead remote teams and how do you lead hybrid teams? Because the world in which we were way back in 2019, where we expect everyone to be in an office, everyone to be in an open office setting or a cubicle farm or what have you, you can't put it back in the box. So the ability to operate and leverage your ability to not only lead people that you see face to face, but how do you lead teams like how we're operating right now in the Zoom space, in a flat world where you really don't know who's in charge or who's not, but you need to pull the best out of every person and leverage every individual's best self to gain some kind of productivity and be positive as you move forward to win for the organization that you're in. So let's talk about this. So if we pull out the way back machine and go all the way back to like 2019, it was so long ago. In the US and across the world, but mainly in the US, the economy was doing pretty well. And so we were like, okay, economy's great, everything's fantastic. So there's no issues. So again, I'm thinking 2019, not a big deal, right? But then all of a sudden, this little bitty ball with spikes, all of a sudden became very aware of what this was. Before now, many of us had no idea what this picture was. Although, if I'm honest, I look back at a lot of the cleaning products I have in my home, there was coronavirus on all of these products that I've never paid attention to. So we knew about it, but it wasn't ever present in any of our lives the way that it has been over the past year. And so this one little ball caused a huge shock to the system. And so we've all experienced it. So we saw, especially in the US in March, we had an awesome market and it just almost seemed to bottom out really quickly over about a week's time. And so this was the world as we think about it around April. As we think about what was going on, we were all feeling the realities of what happens if the world stops. Now, we all know that the world really didn't stop. We have the internet. We were engaged back and forth in this new Zoom space. And what actually happened because of the coronavirus impact, the shocks is that it forced an acceleration of ways in which we're going to operate by 5 years. For example, if we think about telemedicine, if we think about the gig economy or gig workers or the ability to work remote from home, all of these things were going to happen about 4 to 5 years from right now. The difference is from March to May of 2020, it all happened at the snap of a finger across the globe. And all of a sudden, there was a reality that, interesting. So I have some kind of weird thing that just popped up on my screen. So there's a reality that,
quickly, I think you have to disable annotation on your end.
okay. I'm pausing, trash, clear all drawings. Yep, never seen that before.
Sorry, everyone please refrain from annotating.
I've done a lot of Zoom engagement over the past 18 months and that's never happened. So I learned something new. Thank you for educating me on the annotate function needed in the Zoom world. So what I was saying around the area before going to the slide is that what the shock of the COVID-19 did for the world is all of a sudden we all became interconnected in a way we had not been before, okay? Because we as a global citizens decided that we got to get after this, okay? And so now we're in our new normal. So as we think about our new normal, let's see here. This is weird. Sorry about this. Technology at its best. It's almost as if, Tiara, that the ability to control my own system has changed.
Huh. Are you can we try to unshare and then reshare the screen?
I'm trying right now. There we go. All right. Let's try this again. Let's go back. Share. And I'm back with you. All right, great. So technology. So we could have gone without slides here in just a second, just so you know. Don't really need PowerPoint to engage in a dialogue. So if we think about this new normal, the new normal that you're operating in now is how many of you may be in organizations that are going to be 100% virtual, 100% remote. That's one way in which organizations are going to feel like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. I can save a lot of money. I can engage and use the money I would use for real estate and acquisitions of property to have places for offices and use that somewhere else. that's an interesting idea because this is the world we're all operating in. And so, however, there are some organizations that quickly want to go back to the future. They want to go back to the roaring 19 or 2019 around December when everything was copacetic. Everything was the same. We all went to the office. We all commuted, no problem. The problem is reality that how many workers or employers or leaders want to operate in an office 5 days a week. You've been operating from home or some other spaces or somewhere else virtually for over 18 months now. And so your behavior has shifted. And so as leaders, you have to think about the behavior of those who are going to work on your teams and how do they feel? What do they need? And a lot of folks need to be in contact, but there are some who do not. So you have to, that's going to be a challenge for leaders. So it requires some kind of hybrid setting. And so you have to be able to either work in an office, work on Zoom, because the reality is there's a lot of training or engagement, a lot of organizations that cannot not stop training. Like if I use the Department of Defense. So I'm going to pause right here for any initial questions here. Are there any questions so far on the first segment?
Any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Glenda is saying they're all clear. I know Usman is wondering about the film in the previous slide. Is it Back to the Future?
That was Back to the Future.
Great. Dorian has a question. Go ahead, Dorian. Are you?
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Okay.
Good evening. Hello?
We can
Yes,
hear
go ahead.
All right. Good evening. I'm called Dorian from Minganga, Cameroon. In fact, I was wondering, you said people want to create an organization that will work 100% remote. Is that actually possible? Can we actually make an organization function, achieve our objective while working remote 100%? That's my question. Thank you.
No, that is a great question. And so can there be organizations that operate completely remote? Actually, they can be. They're normally smaller organizations versus larger ones. So if we think about smaller startups with a handful of people, you can operate, have distributed teams across geographies and still be able to get things done. And if we think about, if we use like large organizations that we're familiar with, like Facebook. Facebook decided earlier this year that they were not going to be in the office, so to speak, until the end of this year or the beginning of 2022. So let's think about that large, greater than 30,000 person organization that's going to be 100% remote, so or virtual. So you can do it. However, there's a trade-off. Everything comes at a price. So we're all human beings. We like to engage with others. And if we think about some of the practices, if we use guys like Steve Jobs, when Steve Jobs had Apple, they structured their office spaces in such a way to force human interaction, meaning that I have to walk past other people. They position common areas in such a way to where we could have chance meetings, and those chance meetings may call innovative thinking due to the sharing of ideas. This kind of happens sporadically. And if we think about what happens when we move from what we perceived as normal in 2019 to what is normal now, the difference is in between meetings, you would get up and go somewhere, you would move. Even going to the WC or the bathroom, you would engage with someone in passing or someone you haven't seen. And just in that passing, you may get a great idea from someone else. You don't get that in the Zoom space in the same way, or the MS Teams, or the webinar, or the WebEx. You go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and you're exhausted. Now, you can do that, and it's sustainable up to a point. So to answer your question, yes, you can have organizations 100% remote, but as a leader, you have to recognize the trade-offs to that approach, which is why most organizations are really fighting and struggling with the reality of how do I create the appropriate hybrid situation that helps the bottom line of the organization, but also ensures that my employees, team members, teammates are most productive.
Thank
Tiara,
you.
no problem. Tiara, any other questions?
Yeah, great question, Dorian. Thank you for asking. Daniel, we'll go to you.
Hello? Hello?
I can hear you.
Am I playing?
Maybe a little closer to the mic, Daniel.
Hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
So yeah, my concern is just, I think when you answered the real question, you kind of went into it a bit because like you talked about the importance of human interaction and how great leaders like Steve Jobs actually use it to be able to improve connection within the workspace. So my concern is how can we actually still increase human interaction with us leveraging technology or actually existing within the new normal?
And so I think your question is, how do I increase human interaction even in an environment in which we're leveraging technology? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so what's funny, I actually just wrote something on that like a week ago. So the reality is, in what I believe is that if the current environment, and I'll share this at the end of this presentation, puts a lot on the leader to create those situations, even in this kind of environment. And so it requires leaders to force themselves to have more touch points, meaning you have to understand your teams a lot better than you probably did before. You have to engage in a meaningful way. You have to really take the time to get to know the folks who you're working with or your teams, and you're modeling the behavior you want to have, which means if we're honest, you're going to replicate what your boss does. We all do it no matter what organization we're in. And so if your boss is really engaging, if you're on a team and you have teammates that you're responsible for or you're in charge of, you're going to do something similar because you're going to see that framework and you're going to see how it makes you feel. And then you're going to hopefully replicate it with others in order to make them feel the same. And it's very tense because on one hand, that's fantastic. On the other hand, depending on the team, it may be perceived as micromanagement, which is not good. And so it's an interesting balance, but through frequency of engagement, that helps. And through being authentic about those engagements is how you create that human interaction. If you think back to early in the pandemic around April, May timeframe, there was a lot of, if you're of age, especially in the US, you did a lot of happy hours. Those were forced human engagements to kind of help people bond together. But if we're honest, you got happy houred out, so to speak, over the summer of 2020 because you were doing them so frequently. So again, it's a balance, but it can be done. It just takes a lot of intentionality.
Do you think we should take one more question now or save for later?
Let's take one more, then we'll keep going.
So I know in the chat, Faith, I think, asked, what about those of us in emerging economies who are facing lots of internet connection problems and internet is very expensive here? How can 100% virtual work for us?
So based on the economy, it will be challenging, which is why the probability of that happening in emerging economies is very low because of that reality. Because if we're honest, if you set up an organization, costs matter, right? Do you have enough capital to manage? And is the country, government, or large entities in the area investing in the infrastructure? So that's the biggest difference. And so, which means, how do you manage or create the hybrid situation where you're not solely required to be remote because it's tenuous, there's challenges, and you're being realistic about the team members that you have in your organization. So if everyone doesn't have internet, it's kind of hard to be 100% remote. So how do you set up a situation where people can still be productive, either in or out of the office, mainly in, most likely, in order to get what you need to get done? So in emerging economies, the reality of hybrid is greater, or the reality of going back to the future, figuring out a better, more efficient way to come back and be in person, keeping everyone safe, remaining in productivity, and being empathetic leaders. So again, it's challenging based on geography.
Great question, Faith. Daniel as well.
All right, so I'll go to the next section. And so what this depicts, some of you may have heard the term VUCA, some of you may not have, but this is the world in which we live in. And so we live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment, VUCA. So VUCA actually comes from the US military, okay? And so it's a reality that no matter what environment you're in, you're always gonna be in this there's a constant tension between what's going on in the world. And so you as a leader have to figure out, how do I thrive in an environment that is so dynamic that you can't prepare for everything, but you need to be able to do something. So that's the challenge. And so the reality is you're dealing with a bunch of problems all at the same time, and there's a mismatch. And so one way to think about managing this VUCA dynamic wicked problem situation is leveraging something called systems thinking. So there's many ways to think about systems thinking. What I'm going to share with you today is a framework around systems thinking that comes from a great friend of mine. His name is Derek Cabrera. He is a thought leader around systems thinking at Cornell. And so he and I are really good friends. We've been talking about this for years, but this is a very simple framework that I would suggest that can help you manage in this kind of VUCA world, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. And so the idea around, if we think about VUCA in the real world provides boundaries that you have to think about. And sometimes you just throw things together. But you could break these boundaries down. And so if we think about ambiguity, let's throw a different lexicon onto this idea of VUCA. The framework is called the DSRP. D for distinction, S for system, R for relationships, and P for perspectives. Because if we think about any ambiguous reality that we go into, we have to first distinguish what is and what is not. Because even if we don't know what we're dealing with, we know what we're not dealing with. And then we take a systems approach, because if we're honest, everything can be broken up into smaller parts. And so let's take this big thing. Well, what can we do? Let's take a small piece of it. And then we need to understand relationships between what is and what is not. And then recognize that every person, everything, every situation has a perspective. Because think about yourselves in an organization. If you're the CEO, you have a different perspective than your chief operating officer. You have a different perspective than a director or a team member, or you have a different perspective than the person who's on the line. So everyone has a different perspective. So as a leader, you have to acknowledge the perspectives. Because again, the world we're operating in is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. With cyber, if we think about the cyber sphere being the space in which we're seeing a lot more activity. And so in the real world, you have some kind of ideas, and then you have your own mental model. So this is where DSRP can be applied. The real world gives you some kind of feedback and updates your mental model. And so again, if we're dealing with ambiguity, we don't know what's going on, but we have to do something. Again, you have a mental model, so you can update that. And leveraging the DSRP is a way to help you deal with the ambiguity and uncertainty of the environment in which you operate in. So again, there's many different ways that you could approach systems thinking. If you Google it, you'll see a laundry list. This is just a way that I would suggest that's simplistic, simple, and actually you already do all the time. I've just given you a different lexicon to think about how to approach these things and provide you a way to speak about what you're actually doing intuitively when you're engaging when dealing with complex problems. Because the reality is training never stops. And so I used to fly helicopters, so I have to have a helicopter picture in all of my presentations, just so you know. Kind of like a thing. All right. So are there any questions? I'll hand it off to Tiara.
I think if anyone has a question, please feel free to take a second to type it in the chat, or you can go ahead and raise your hand and we can call on you. Fiona is responding to kind of what you were saying on emerging economies, on how countries can reorganize infrastructure. So how can what are the implications of diverting funds from, say, transportation towards data purchasing in emerging economies to support remote work is one question from Fiona. And Osman also, please feel free to take either one. Osman has a question about since most businesses found it very difficult to adopt the new normal, what could have been the cause of this difficulty, and how can we as students, employees, be effective while learning or working remotely?
Okay, so I can hit both of those. So the reality around the infrastructure part is that's very country driven. It's very country, culture, region of the world driven, and ability to invest in the infrastructure and recognizing that it's not necessarily an either or in the current environment. So although governments have to make trade-offs, it can't be either or, because in order to stay competitive and to maintain the ability to keep the best talent you can in your country, you have to make those investments. And so countries have to decide. But you need both. You need buses, and you need some kind of fiber or technological infrastructure to support the ability for folks to work remote in the country. So again, that's not an either or. Second, that's a great question, because around organizations that quickly want to go back to the way it was. And normally the reason why is because, if we're honest, the leaders who are in those organizations are a little bit older. They may not be as comfortable with technology, and may be challenged acknowledging the high performing team members, employees, leaders that they have in their organizations. And so to that end, it really takes the leaders at the lower levels to share the benefits of how you're working, to share the benefits that I'm actually more productive when I'm not here for this long. However, there probably are times where we need to be together as a team in order to facilitate the normal innovation that comes from human to human interaction. But again, it just takes some, it's a very, again, all these are delicate tightropes in order to navigate, because it's, again, we're people organizations. So, you know, sometimes people are tenuous. And so it's just challenging. Tiara, are there any other questions?
Yes. Are you open to one more question for this round?
Sure. Yep.
Great. Shoshana, will go to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for the very interesting topic. I would like to ask a question and comment on the idea of having the remote option for the employees. Firstly, I think, do you think that maybe not going 100% offline for the companies, but having this option embedded for the employees can increase actually their productivity? So to speak for myself, I work, and when the pandemic hit Armenia, where I live and work here, initially it was really hard when there was the lockdown and we were not allowed to go to our workplaces. It was hard to adapt fast to the daily operations, to be able to work smoothly from home. So initially the cost was high for the company to enable employees to work remotely. It was like with the team viewer or some other systems which would allow us to connect to our work computers and work. However, later, once we were in the system already. So we knew how it was working and we were fine with it. It was I would say it was even comfortable for us. And now in Armenia, the pandemic, like the numbers are going down for the coronavirus. And now in my workplace, we have the option. We in a week for 2 or 1 day, we can choose to work from home. And because the system is already set up, has been set up, it's comfortable for us. When we know we have big discussions and it would be more comfortable to be at the workplace, we go there. But if we have something else like which we need to do after work and it's more comfortable for us to work from home, we work from home. And I do believe having this option for myself, it motivates me more having this flexibility is a plus for my employer and for me as well. So do you think that maybe not going 100% offline, but having this option of working offline is an advantage for the employer compared to other employers who don't give the option to their employees? Thank you.
That is a fantastic question, and I completely agree with you. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal experience, because your employer has a competitive advantage over other competitors who are competing to get top talent in your area, because they figured out how to manage themselves and how to provide an option. So, because as you highlighted, there's sometimes where you might want to be in the office. There's sometimes where it might be more productive to be at home, but productivity and office they don't equal. And so those organizations that are able to adapt, and to your point, initially, a huge initial investment in probably technology, equipment, mailing to get things to folks, verifying that everyone has an internet connection. That's a high cost for organization. But now that process has been laid out, that initial capital cost has happened, they're going to benefit from your productivity over time. So I think organizations that are able to provide the option are going to be more attractive, especially to the current workforce, because if we're honest, the workforce today has far more agency than the labor force before it, because folks will walk, folks will leave, and they're based on the kind of talent that we have around the world, folks can find another opportunity remotely in major organizations across the planet. And so I think you're absolutely right, and your organization in Armenia is probably very happy with that initial investment, although it was very painful at the onset. So I think we're good, Tiara.
Sounds good. Thanks, Shashan, for the question.
And so now let me give you something to walk away with. So leading remote or hybrid teams are challenging, period. But the weight of who's responsible for managing this is really not necessarily on the teams themselves, but it's really on the leaders. How are you going to do it? How are you going to manage these distributed teams remotely or otherwise? Well, I would recommend, I'm going to call it something called LEAD. So a good moniker, LEAD. So first you have to be able to leverage the platform, whatever that is. For some, it is Microsoft Teams. It could be Zoom. It could be Google Meet. It could be Slack. It could be any other kind of crashing software that exists to manage your specific responsibilities. Next, for E, L-E-A-D, so E, engage the friction, meaning it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have some resistance. You're going to have some naysayers who don't want to, adjust. But instead of stepping away from it, I would encourage leaning into it so that you can really try to pull people along, or at least determine who's going to be on board and who's not, in order to make sure that your team is going to win. And then you have to adapt to that in your environment. So your environment may have been 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in a remote world, your environment could be 12 noon to 2000 at night. It depends, but you as the leader have to adapt to the environment and then communicate succinctly and in a concise way to your team how they might want to adapt to the environment that you're operating in. And then lastly, as the leader person, you have to distill quickly the most important points. So the bird of leadership, so to speak, is how do you take in all this information? How do you understand the environment? How do you visualize what's happening? Then how do you distill what needs to occur into very succinct points in order to provide your team what they need in order to be productive? Because the reality is remote teams requires more management by the leader. And to an earlier point I highlighted, in order to manage these teams and create a human interaction, it has to be active engagement. You have to lean in as the leader and really create those opportunities and touch points. So one, that you're aware of what's going on, but then two, you create a culture that everyone is engaging one another with dignity and respect, and with the idea that we as a team want to win, which means if all the teams are winning, the organization has to win. And so I'll pause right here, Tara, for any questions.
Great, thanks. So just give students a second to raise their hands or type their questions. Margus, how about we go over to you?
Hello everyone, thank you for the opportunity. I'm a nursing student, so I will comment on this topic especially because I belong to a healthcare professional where we have to do most of the things in the class. We have to do most of the skill. So due to COVID-19, I think so, we and our studies has been affected the most because we have to do most of the things physically and we have to learn each and everything in the class and we have to visit patient for everything. So I think that the infrastructure and the whole economy for the medical field has changed due to COVID-19. And can you suggest please how we can manage our studies and how we have to manage the economy and all the rest of the thing, because we are affected by COVID-19 the most and we have to deal it in the hospital area. Thank you.
And so I'm just going to recap. So the reality is that in the healthcare field, as we know, the need and requirement to do many things in person has been challenged due to COVID-19. And then how do we manage that? Is that the question? That loser. Tara, was that a good summary?
I think that was a good summary, and I think she might have dropped off the call.
Okay, and so I can quickly answer that though. I mean, I think the reality is like there's some professions that have to be hands-on. However, even in the healthcare field, as we found out, even medical schools have had to augment virtual learning and then create some kind of additional requirements to ensure that the medical professionals that are being trained have what they need in order to do the job, to keep all of us healthy. And so, because the reality is if we don't have a healthy, if we're not a healthy society, we can't have a healthy labor force, and it drives the economy. And so I just think it's a pivot in which was going to happen, but it just happened faster due to COVID. Next question.
Feel free to put your hands up or type your questions in the chat. Mabuso, how about we go to you? Also, if I'm saying anyone's name incorrectly, please let me know. Please correct me. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you.
Yeah, it's Mbuso from Pretoria, South Africa. I just want to ask a question. I just want to ask, do you think there's a correlation between, the compensation that employees receive and, the workplace where they work from? Because I'm thinking as an employer, I might want to take down the compensation that employees receive if they're working from home because they're not spending the same effort to come to, the workplace and stuff like that. Thank you.
That is a fantastic question. And the employer that takes that idea will lose the talent that they think they want to have. Because on one hand, that's a reasonable thought that, okay, so if you're not spending or having to allocate resources to get to work in a building that I as an employer am providing, then I should lower the compensation. The problem with that is that there's another competitor who will have the same or more compensation for the exact same person, and they won't care where they are. And so some organizations will attempt to lower comp based on that, but the employee has to determine, do they want quality of life more than they want comp? So there's a two-way negotiation happening here. And so, but I think that is not necessarily the case, because a good road to take, primarily because if you're an employer, you are hiring for a capability, and there's a market. The market has a allocated band for that capability, so you have to be at least within that band. But again, I think there's enough competition for high performing talent to where if a organization takes what you described as the way forward, they're going to lose out on a lot of amazing talent due to the fact that folks have options.
Great. Thanks so much for the question. I'm going to take a question from the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Divya's question is that I guess the comment and question is that big corporations have been able to gain more profit during the pandemic, but employees have not received so much of the benefits. Moreover, it has led to overworking. How can we manage such situations to make more sustainable recovery from the pandemic?
So, and so on all points, you're absolutely right. So large corporations have done very well over the pandemic, and workers have been overworked because we're shifting from meeting to meeting to meeting and actually becoming more productive. And I would agree with you that type of way in which we work is not necessarily sustainable over the long haul. So I anticipate corporations are gradually trying to push down and provide more benefits, because the name of the game at this moment is, how do I retain the talent that we need? How do we look over the horizon post-pandemic into this new normal? And how do we retain the great talent that we have? And then how do we attract others to come here? So organizations are gradually already starting to make adjustments based on this reality that you described.
Great. Zersh had an interesting question in this chat. Zersh, are you open to asking a question out loud?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
For this session, I just wanted to ask, how do you think that systems thinking can positively contribute to the field of education, given the current circumstances that we have? What would be the best practices to positively affect the field of education these days?
That is a fantastic question. And I believe that educators are already leveraging the system thinking approach in which I described. And I can use an example of at least in some countries, how the education space had to pivot quickly from in-person learning to remote learning. So if we think about all of the boundaries, so all of a sudden we can't have people inside, all of a sudden we have to create curriculum and have platforms in which to operate remote. And then an issue that sounds great until you realize not all of your students have access to the internet. So now how do we operate? Okay, well, let's create pods. And so I think the DSRP method, distinction, relationship, systems, perspectives, situation, provides a framework that educators use intuitively in order to ensure that they can educate their students and are already thinking about how we're going to do this again in the fall. So again, it's an approach to ambiguity. There's a lot of certainty in education. The content is pretty certain. We know what content you have to do. However, the way in which it's delivered is not as certain. So this is where the system thinking can help. And then if, unfortunately, we know in the US, we've lost a bucket of students. So for instance, let's say we have 100,000 students. We know that like maybe 10,000 might not show up to school in the fall. So we've actually lost groups of students. So how do we find those individuals in order to ensure that the populace is educated? So I think using this system thinking approach can help across the spectrum in the education space.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Thierry.
Great, thanks for the question, Zersh. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Does that sound right?
Yep, that sounds right.
Great. Darshan, please go ahead. Are you able to unmute yourself? All right, we'll go ahead, take another question. Ahmed, go ahead.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well.
I'm just gonna make it short. My question is as follows. Do you think that this new norm will fade away in the near future?
So that was very short. I was not anticipating that kind of concise question. Fantastic. No, it will not fade away because now it's out of the box, meaning that we're human beings. So we know once a shock happens to the system, we change behaviors, and no matter how much we want to go back to the way it was, it will never be the way it was. And think about it. In some parts of the world where you didn't do a lot of things virtually, you're all of a sudden doing everything virtually, and
Yes.
you're less patient. So what do you mean I can't use an app for that? That's a problem in some parts of the world. In other parts of the world where there wasn't as much fiber or infrastructure, some countries invested quickly to at least get infrastructure in certain parts and places in more populated areas. Well, you're not going to pull that back. You're only going to extend it because the realized benefit. And again, changing behavior.
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Great, thanks for the question, and also appreciate the brevity so we can get one more student in. Darshan, I want to loop back to you since I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself. Looks like not yet. Barak, over to you.
Oh, I can't hear him.
Are you able to unmute yourself?
Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Hello, sir. Darshan this side. Yeah. So I just wanted to ask a small question. So, what do you see like in the post-COVID world? What would be the greatest or the most important qualities of a leader?
Oh, okay, great question. So there are many qualities that make a really good leader, just in general. And there's like 1,000 books written on leadership if you go to Amazon.com, like 1,000. Okay, but at least to me, I think some of the most important qualities of a leader is one, to be able to provide predictability to their teams. So if you're able to figure out a way to communicate in a concise way to provide predictability, your team members appreciate that. Second, I think being able to communicate what is cool about what you're doing. Because if we're honest, all of us want to do like cool stuff. We all want to engage and being part of the cool thing or the great organization or helping our communities, our countries, or the world for that matter. So, but it's up to the leader to be able to communicate why what someone is doing is pretty cool. So being able to provide some kind of predictability and to be able to communicate why something is important are pretty key attributes. And with that, being a very empathetic leader, having empathy, because everyone's not the same. So just because you hold people accountable, just because sometimes some rigidity is required, that doesn't negate the reality that you have to show empathy in order to meet people where they are, so that then you can understand them and then drive and help place them in position for them to do awesome. And so it takes a lot of time, but and a lot of practice. And every once in a while as a leader, you got to admit when you don't know. There's been many times in my time of being in charge of small and large teams where I did not have the right answer, didn't know how to do it. And the most junior person on the team had it down, and it was the right way to do things. And we leveraged his or her way of operating, and the whole operation went very well. And so you also have to kind of swallow your pride sometimes as a leader. So there's multiple facets to that. But if you picked up on the ability to communicate is the biggest and clearest quality to be a solid leader.
Great. I think that was a really wonderful question. I know we are at time, so I'll pass it over to you to wrap up, or however you feel comfortable.
So not a problem. So I'll leave this with you. Remember, the thing to walk away with as you think about leading remote teams and hybrid teams in general is this idea of lead. You know, how are you going to do that? How are you going to leverage those platforms? How are you going to lean into the friction? How are you going to adapt to the environment and help others adapt? And then to that last question, how are you going to distill that information quickly and figure out what's the most important thing to engage your teams? And so I really appreciate the opportunity to share. Really fantastic questions, not only the ones that were asked, but really great questions in the chat that unfortunately I wasn't able to get to, but really thank you for being engaged. Unless I can hang out, Tira, for a little while longer. If you want to hit some more questions, I have no problem with that, because there's I see 6 hands up. So I'm fine with that. I don't have to jump to something else immediately.
Okay, great. I'm sure the students really appreciate that. I'm very excited. I also hope that all of you are feeling and seeing the flow between these sessions. I know we talked a little bit about remote work in our last session and about leadership and perspective in the session before. So this session was wonderful to see those pieces tied together. We'll take, I think, maybe 1 or 2 more questions, if that sounds good. I'll take one out loud and I can pull one from the chat if that sounds like it'd be good for you, Dr. Gibson.
Hey, no problem.
Perfect. So Akib, will go to you. Are you able to unmute yourself? Great.
Yes, Akib here. Am I audible?
Yes, you're getting a little feedback, but go ahead.
Yes, sir. I have a question that remote work hits the teamwork badly. Unlike individual work, there is always a lack of connection between team members. So what a leader can do in such a situation?
Fantastic. So in the situations where you now are not having this engagement. So right now, I'm looking at a screen, it's 5 different screens. They're all flat. You all look amazing, but we don't have that in-person engagement. And so the leader has, in my opinion, has to facilitate those short, almost sprint-like touch points. And so, but it has to be very intentional. And so it's what kind of rhythm or cadence do you have for your organization, and what kind of cadence do you have for yourself? Meaning, if you have a team of like 5 people, how often are you meeting with those 5 people individually? Like just to really get to know who they are, what's going on, and then leverage their feedback in like real team kind of events. So, but again, it's a certain cadence. And so those touch points are not the same as if we're in person, but they're about as close as we can get in the flat world in which we live in right now. So again, it's frequency. It always comes back to deliberate, intentional leader frequency. But again, it's tenuous. There is a such thing as over frequency, because if you're meeting so much, the person who you're meeting with is not getting their task done. So it's a balance.
Great question, Akib. I'll take one more question from the chat, but just want to say, please stay on. Even after this last question, we have some information about the Crossroads Emerging Leaders Program. So please don't log off even after Dr. Gibson logs off. Even though I know he's definitely the highlight of my morning, I'm sure for all of your days as well. So I think an interesting question that came in the chat was, do you have any books or resources that you recommend? I think a lot of the goal of Crossroads is to provide, kind of these tangible tools, these tangible skill building workshops to have the tools that they need to create social impact and change in the students' communities. So if there's any resources or books that you recommend.
So I'll throw out 2 books. Okay, 3. No, 4. So starting with Why by Simon Sinek. If you haven't read it, it's very short. But starting with Why, because if we think about what I was described around attributes of leaders, around communicating, if we're honest, we're most effective when we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. We just are. So starting with Why is Simon Sinek. Good leaders ask great questions. That's a Maxwell book. So, but good leaders ask great questions helps you think about what are those ways in which you can get the most out of your team members or out of teammates or out of organizations. Because as the leader person, you're not going to know everything. You're not supposed to. Only when you're like the startup founder and you're like employee 1 do you know everything. After you become like employee 10 or 100, you don't know everything and you're not supposed to, but you are required to ask good questions. What got you here won't get you there. That's another book. What got you here won't get you there. So if you're honest, we all get promoted based on whatever we just did, but that's not why you're in the position that you're in, because now you have to like do something else. But unfortunately, we all fall into the trap of, well, I was really awesome as that manager person, and now you're doing their job. Well, all you're doing is stifling their ability to grow because you're doing the old job and not the new job. So what got you here won't get you there. And the last book is Turn the Flywheel. Turn the Flywheel is a very short book, but it may provide you perspective on what are those key things in your flywheel. If a flywheel, if you fish like a big circle, has different pockets around it. And so, as you're turning the flywheel, what makes it turn faster? You have different attributes, different capabilities that you may want to harness, or frameworks you may want to use that helps you accelerate your own flywheel. So this idea is applied to organizations, but you can actually apply it to your personal life. So instead of giving like 2 things, I throw out like 4. So, but they're all easy reads, or I actually listen to a lot of books. So if you're one of those, I'd recommend Audible or some other Kindle or listening, or use your Mac, but or whatever device you have. So again, thank you so much for staying on. Thank you for the amazing questions. Tara, I really appreciate being asked to share and be part of the program, because this is so important. And please continue to take advantage of these kind of opportunities. And please, hopefully, you're taking what you're getting from all these different sessions and then turning around and then immediately applying it to your every day, because that's the idea. Not just to theoretically talk about some stuff that is so awesome. No. You can go do some stuff and really get better and really engage. And so good luck and thank you so much. And I'll sign off.
Thanks so much. Hi, such an amazing session. I learned a lot, and I know the chat is really blowing up. And we'll send you any questions or comments afterwards, and feedback from the students. And so great to hear from you. So great to learn from you. And thank you so much for lending your time to Crossroads this morning.
No, thank you, and good luck to you all.
Thanks. So all of you, please stay on for a second. We definitely want to hear some more of what your experiences in these sessions have been. So we're going to run a couple quick polls. If you're able to stay on for a couple seconds and answer. Afi, do you want to go ahead and, oh, there, I see it. So please just take some time to answer, just a couple seconds just to answer these questions. And again, if you have extra comments, we always care so much about improving your experiences in this program. So please email us. You have our email, and you can message us on social media with any feedback. I'm seeing some responses come in. That's great. Perfect. I'm seeing almost half of you have responded. I hope we can get up to, I know you're all very high achieving, 80%, 90%. I know we can do it together. It's really, really helpful for us to get the answers to these questions, because we do want to support you as much as possible in being able to access these sessions. And we want to be able to support you more tangibly by providing more data or finding a route through which we can support your access. So close to almost all of you. I know that for many of you, it's getting late, so we'll keep the chat open while you all finish up the poll. I also would love for all of you to continue to get to know each other. Please stay connected. Maybe in the chat while we're all still here, you can send your favorite song in the moment, any song that you've been listening to a lot recently. Does anyone have any good ones? Maybe we can start the next session by playing that song. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for all of you who have filled out the poll. Again, we will definitely keep the chat open. But yeah, thank you so much for joining this morning's session. Thank you for your responses to the poll. Davin, thank you for sending a song. Lionel Richie, I Call It Love. Great. Zane, very, very, very good music being sent. Hosier, very cool. Aldo, you're a DJ. Wow, I did not know that. Okay, Anaconda, very nice. Okay, I think I'll keep the chat open, but it was so good to see all of you this morning, and hope you're having fun finding some world music. Also, if you have emailed us, we'll get back to you very soon. And you can also message us on social media if that's easier. Okay, bye everyone. Have a good night, evening, afternoon. Bye. Afi, can you keep the meeting open for a second still? Thanks.
Sure.